everybody who's joined us on our climate action live streaming. So just to welcome you all very much to the Future Africa campus here at the University of Pretoria and this important symposium on sexual reproductive health and rights, gender and climate change resilience. And I do want to acknowledge that we're very honoured to have been joined by Honourable Minister Nkwana Mshabani, who will be joining us today for our opening remarks. So we're now going to move into our session on opening remarks, and I'm very pleased to have our three speakers with us. And we're going to start this morning with somebody extremely special. So we have with us Miss Yola Mngogwana. She's 11, and she's an eco-warrior. So she studies at the Yomalela Primary School in Khayelitsha, and I hear by these notes that you recently addressed 2,000 people, so I'm sure that this small audience here today will be no problem to you at all. So you're most welcome. Yola. You need a mic.
Hi everyone. My name is Yola Mngogwana. I'm 11 years old and I'm a climate change activist. I will probably still be alive long after many of you are dead. So the planet's future is my future. That is why so many of us young people have been protesting, both here and all over the world. We feel more passionately because it will affect us most deeply. I first learned words like global warming and environmental crisis when I first joined the Earth Trial Project in 2018. I was told the future looked bad. Soon we might not have enough food or water. Without water, disease would spread and we would get sick. And we have learned life without water. May 2017 was the lowest point our Western Cape dams have ever been. We had about 11% of drinkable water left. But in the midst of this water crisis, something really incredible happened. The mindset to save water became the new normal. Citizens started using the spring water at pumps. Boreholes and water recycling became standard in every home. You couldn't go to a public toilet without seeing Cape Town's motto, "If it's yellow, let it mellow." Everyone felt the danger of day zero. But everyone is not affected in the same way. I live in Khayelitsha, which is a big township in Cape Town. I already fetched the water for my house from a communal tap. When we go to the bathroom, we use pit toilets. These are dangerous. They are not safe and they are not clean. In some townships, parents have to surround their children to make sure they don't get shot by gangs on the way to school. Teachers don't come to class because they're scared of the violence. So I'm already living in this future that others fear. There are large numbers of people in Khayelitsha who don't have enough to eat, and we do not have enough water supply. Climate change affects poor people worse than the rich ones. The latest research found Khayelitsha had 65,000 shacks, housing about 200,000 people, half the township population. If Khayelitsha will be hit by floods, half the population will lose their homes and many will die. That's why, on 15 March this year, I decided to be one of the kids who would not stay silent any longer. On that day, at least 1.6 million school children across all 7 continents took a stand against climate change. In more than 125 countries and in over 200 places and 2,000 places, school students marched and protested against climate change. Where we stand now in the country and all over the world, people don't see, they don't realize the crisis, but I know because I have seen it. We can make a positive impact when we work together. Today, the dams in the Western Cape are at 80%. We did that, and we can do so much more. The climate crisis needs to be taken seriously. It may take children like us to make people sit up and listen. It may take me to tell you I'm living the future that you keep saying is coming. But it will take each one of you, each one of us, to save what is left of the world. As youth, we care. We have barely spent a decade on this planet, but we care. What about the rest of you? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lola, not only for those sobering open remarks, but I think also for your commitment to action. Thank you so much. I'd now like to call to the podium Dr. Julita Onabanjo, who's the Regional Director for East and Southern Africa, UNFPA. He'll be giving opening remarks on behalf of UNFPA.
Thank you, Justine. I need to speak into this?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, Honourable Minister. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Indeed, you know, the other day I was looking at who are the renowned African female climate change activists, and your name came up. So please give Minister a clap. And it came up because indeed in 2011, South Africa hosted a climate summit in Durban. And I think that was the beginning of really us thinking about the Paris Agreement and really setting the stage. And that was chaired by the Honourable Minister. In addition to that, I think Africa has played important roles in COP21 in Paris, where it really led the negotiations on behalf of the G77 and China, in Africa's negotiations around a number of these critical climate actions. And so it really is an honor to have you here. And I know in your role currently as the minister that's responsible for youth, women, and disabilities, I'm sure you continuously bring that lens to this conversation that we're going to have. So really, it is an honor to have you here. We also have with us the Governor Dalisto Kambambe from the Malawi Reserve Bank, our governor, so we can hear the economic side of some of these conversations. Your Excellency, the Deputy Prime Minister, Deputy British High Commissioner, Prime Minister one day. Dr. Catherine, my sister in crime, our Regional Director for UNAIDS for East and Southern Africa. Our colleagues from WHO, the World Food Programme, UNEP, Human Rights, our development partners, our experts that have come from afar. Thank you. And really all the leadership of UNFPA that is out in full to really listen and partner with all of you. But especially to Yola and to all the other young eco warriors, thank you for being here. We warmly, warmly welcome you on behalf of our Executive Director, Dr. Natalia Kanem, but really on behalf of all of us, because indeed we feel that this is an extremely important African symposium on sexual reproductive health, gender and climate resilience. We truly appreciate that you've come to participate. And also those who are tuned in on live, we know that my brother Benoit, who will be waking up at 3 p.m. to join, 3 a.m. in New York, to join us as well. Today and over the next 2 days, we will be part of really a critical African continental milestone in this year's commemoration of the 25th years of the Programme of Action and the groundbreaking International Conference on Population and Development. But also it's our 50th anniversary as United Nations Population Fund. Around this time last year, African member states, under the auspices of the Africa Union Commission, the UN Economic Commission of Africa, and UNFPA, we gathered in Accra, Ghana, to discuss the 5-year review of the Africa's Population and Development Agenda. It's called the Addis Ababa Declaration on Population and Development. And at that gathering, I think country by country, whether they belonged to small island development states, whether they were part of the Sahel, whether they were part of the Lake Chad Basin, the Great Lakes, or the Horn of Africa, each of them underscored the severity, the frighteningness, the gravity, and the multidimensional challenge of climate change, including what they had seen as internally displaced movements, regional mobility, food insecurity, climate-induced instability, peace and insecurity, and I was talking to Zenan just now. They drew attention to climate change as one of their most pressing emergent population matters that required the immediate attention of Africa if we were to fully realize not only the ICPD program of action, but harnessing Africa's demographic dividend, realizing the Africa Agenda 2063, the Africa we wanted, and attaining the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. And so that drive at Accra, plus what then happened at the Africa Regional Forum on Sustainable Development, where again, member states said that we need for Africa a common position on climate change. And that we realized that indeed, this was that continent that had contributed least to the increasing global gas emissions, but will continue and is continuing to suffer most from its impact. And so really as a regional team, we said if there was anything we could do to really bring to the table on this significant 25th year commemoration, a population issue that we felt in Cairo 25 years ago was dealt with from an environmental population stance, but really in terms of really concrete actions and centering it within a human rights and a sexual and reproductive health and rights agenda, we didn't feel we had done enough. And so really, and I'm looking at Angela, Daniel, Serge is not here, but there was a whole group of us that thought this is what we wanted to bring to this year's celebration. And so we've joined experts today, civil society, private sector development partners, funders, financiers, and the likes of the Africa Young Leaders like Yola, to really come together to chart what we feel must be a game-changing actions that will guarantee that rights, options, dignity, and choices for all are not held back by the impacts of climate crisis. And that we could really build into climate actions, but also, more importantly, international sustainable development, policy, economic development, growth, plans and programs, these adaptation strategies that really take into account the perspectives of sexual and reproductive health, of reproductive choices, of gender equality, of youth leadership, all based on that strong foundation of population data and that leverage new technologies. So for us, this is what makes us excited about this symposium. We're really excited. It is about action, and so we really have worked hard that the program will come up with what we believe will be a concrete set of really urgent way forward for us. Our expectations are high, and so we're going to test you and get all we can. As we say, we will milk everything we can in the discussions that we will have in the next 2.5 days. We want commitments as well. And we think that if this symposium can come up with not only actions, but commitments that we can table. In 27 days from now, there will be the Global Climate Action Summit in New York at the General Assembly. There is the Nairobi Summit, and our colleague gave a shout out, all roads lead to Nairobi. This will be the culmination of this 25 years anniversary of ICPD, where member states will come, partners will come and recommit to an unfinished agenda. But also as we look forward to the Santiago Climate Change Conference in December. But in all your spaces, how you take forward some of these actions will be really important. And for South Africa, you've led us once before. We think you continue to lead us, particularly in the agenda of sexual and reproductive health and population. And we really do hope that you will position some of these commitments that we have, and especially in your role as you take over the chair of the African Union next year. So really looking forward to that. I had a little bit more I wanted to say, but I'm conscious of time, and I know Justina is probably looking at me. But I did want to really say that we have a golden opportunity to reimagine together, to rewrite a more ambitious, bold, transformative, forward-looking and inclusive set of actions commensurate with what we are seeing. And you know, the last 3 weeks we've been faced with a black day in Brazil with the burning of the rainforest and the threats that that will continue to have not only within that community but on the world. As temperatures rise across all our parts of the continent, and the prediction that it will even rise faster than the global average, I think we cannot afford to miss this opportunity to redouble our efforts and to take more decisive actions now. We must loudly and clearly make the case for the links between universal access to sexual and reproductive health as key to preparing and adapting for climate change. We know that poor sexual and reproductive health and the lack of the basic rights and choices increases people's vulnerabilities to climate shock. We know that climate change amplifies the vulnerabilities, especially for our African women and children, their health, their well-being, their education, their agency, their capacity, and their productivity. And we know that climate change will begin to widen inequality gaps and push those that are even further behind and left on the fringes of development. So, Honorable Minister, Excellencies, and dear friends, as custodians of that ICPD program of action, and as we continue to work to fulfill its full implementation, as that SRH agency of the UN system, we really do want to join others to understand how we can do what we need to do in adaptation better. Whether it is, and I reflect on the last year and my missions to places and countries and parts and communities where they are responding in innovative and creative ways as UN families, with governments, with communities, whether it's in Binchu in South Sudan, where there is real efforts to ensure that women are safe as they go to fetch firewood, whether it's in the maternity homes in Lesotho, in the Butabuta Hospital, where women are coming earlier because they know that at some point in time access might be an issue, whether it's because of floods or drought, whether it's those who are really responding to the margins of the cyclone along the Mozambique border. We are doing actions. We have to do more to ensure that no woman dies in childbirth because she cannot reach that facility because of mudslides or because of floods or because of wildfires. That no pregnant woman is malnourished or undernourished because crops have failed. But because no girl is kept from school because she has to spend most of her day looking for that water, Yola, that you spoke about, that is becoming scarce. And that she so desperately needs to help her family, but particularly when she's having her periods, to keep her dignity. That no girl is married off because she's one more mouth to feed in a family who's fragile. That no young girl is sexually exploited because she has climate-related poverty and therefore risks getting HIV. I am confident that this symposium will identify those sets of recommendations and actions. Let me end with a Zulu proverb. And I won't say it in Zulu because my Zulu is not good, but it's a simple one. Says that it is not fear, but courage that is important. And I think we have this unique opportunity to not be fearful of climate crisis that loom over us, to have that conviction that you have, Yola, that we can make this a better place, to be more vocal, bold, courageous, and to believe that the collective, we are able to make what seems daunting and impossible at this time possible. I look forward to the rich deliberations. I thank you again, Minister, for joining us and all these special people. And I know that we will build new partnerships and we will work together to make really the world a better place, not only for us, but for your generation and the generations to come. Warmly welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julita. And I think thank you for reminding us the urgency and impact of all of these issues for women and girls across the region. I now have a great honour of inviting the Honourable Minister to the podium to give her opening remarks. The Honourable Minister in the Presidency for Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, also previously the Minister for Rural Development and Land Reform, and also previously the Minister of International Relationships. You're most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Forgive me for my cough. Program Director, Her Excellency, the Regional Director of Southern Africa, United Nations Population Fund, and dear friend, Dr. Yulita Onabanjo, Yola. I almost said Lola because my daughter's name is Lola, but much older than you. But I'll tell Lola that I've listened to your most inspiring speech. I'll also make sure that you connect. All global leaders, young global leaders who are participating in this symposium from far and near, all excellencies and representatives of the UNFPA in the room, diplomats, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to spend a few minutes of my time with your good self today, experts in the continent who would, in the 33 days coming, discussing opportunities to integrate social and reproductive health and rights, gender and climate change resilience, and other global climate change actions. We are looking forward to the outcome of the symposium. You pricked me a little bit, Doctor, when you reminded me of COP17, because I worked with a miracle worker, our minister, our late minister of environment, the late Minister Edna Molewa. I call her a miracle worker because the president, from President Zuma to President Ramako's Papasa, they all jokingly called her a miracle worker. Little did I know that when I saw her on the 3rd of September last year, that was it. Took her 6 days and she was gone. But the legacy, the passion she left with the global citizenry, if I can say, on climate change and environment, it's unspeakable. In fact, a few months before she passed on, she got an honor, or was honored by the French government for her contribution at the COP that took place in France. Where was I with her last? You know, she brought the things that you would consider very, very complicated and difficult, because the language climate change experts use sometimes get far removed from practically what does it mean to the people. This symposium also has to be thinking of strategies in order to be able to reach out to them. I think amongst the other things that, Doctor, we need to look at is the language. I wish Sis Edna was still around. Because the last time I saw her, we had a big, big expo in one rural area, just as it happened to be in my home province, where she had prepared. As she was preparing this symposium, she thought of climate change, she thought of environment, but she thought of the likes of Yola, who are not living, I know it's not a good thing to say, closer to Cape Town, but who are in the faraway Thohoyandou, God-forsaken place near Kruger National Park, who must raise children. But in this continent, not so long ago, our people lived. As much as South Africa is one of the polluters, as much as it is an African country, it is not necessarily the majority African people in South Africa who contribute to this polluting of the environment. But reality is, our constitution said South Africa belongs to all who live in it. Those who live in Thohoyandou and those who live in Sandton. We all live in South Africa. So she had called this expo to look at how we could go back to basics and use indigenous knowledge systems to survive. Absolutely nothing was feeling like, the disaster that has happened in Maputo would happen. Hardly a few months that she has passed on with all her ideas, Zimbabwe declared that they're about to let go of or free of that which you and I can in this environment call climate refugees. Millions of Zimbabweans will go hungry very, very soon. Kenya had declared about 1 million who would become, in your language, in my language, from COP17, climate refugees. They say in Kenya 1 million people would not be sure of their next meal because of drought. Not in years to come, Yola. Just in a few weeks' time. This is the reality that we are faced with. And it doesn't mean that in South Africa we do not have such. But there's a lot that in this young democracy, in the 25 years, government has come out to cushion up that if those programs that government had come up with, I'm sure they would equally be, we'd also equally be declaring some of our people near destitute. This symposium is taking place after the decisions by the state parties at COP22 on gender and climate change, where the subsidiary bodies for implementation was tasked with the responsibility to develop gender action plan in order to support the implementation of gender-related decisions and mandates under United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change Processes. I would say this is long overdue because where I come from, Limpopo, here in South Africa, where majority people are still, if not government is there, would not be sure of the next meal, depended on the old ways, the indigenous ways of bringing up a family. As much as our people were not as clever as calling things by these big names, but every family would cling on the female or the mother in their household. Hence, it's such a beautiful coincidence that you have organized this symposium in August. In August, here in South Africa, everybody, truly we believe, is saluting women because this is the Women's Month. This has not come by accident. It is because in 1956, 20,000 women marched to the Union Building, marching against apartheid and past laws. Years gone by, as we became free, the 9th of August became a day to remember how formidable an African woman can be. Formidable from her age, because by the time I asked her, whispering, "How old are you?" She said 11. I'm like, she already knows how to take care of the household, needs at 11. Maybe when other kids are playing outside, or maybe when boy children are allowed to be whoever they want to be. Because this is inborn. Women in South Africa, in Africa, are born multitasked. So the outcome of this symposium would help them, will help the women of Africa, that with those, born multitasked, indigenous knowledge system, what else can they do to save humanity? Half the time, women where we live here, their biggest challenge, our challenge, is patriarchy. It's poverty, it's unemployment. So it's not getting better with the challenges that come with these vulgarities that come with climate change. As a country, we're looking forward to the key activities and indicators that will assist this continent in implementing gender-sensitive climate change policies. And you'd find that we don't stand by the wayside. We would be participants, because that's what women do best, taking care of the other. That's why the same that I think you and I believe in, that poverty bears a feminine face. Not everywhere else, but where we live, because we can't talk about other places we don't know. How poor the family is in Africa. We look at the mother in the family and realize, oh, she must be from a poor family. Why? Because women take care of everybody else before they could think of self. So, as a ministry in the presidency responsible for women, that is 2 months ago, youth and persons with disabilities, we understand that unless issues of these vulnerable groups are mainstreamed and our policies and programs, they will not be addressed. Therefore, this symposium is welcome. And in my previous portfolios, as you had said earlier on, in international relations and the other one, and as a former ambassador, before I did the other smaller things, I was an ambassador for 10 years in different countries. I was able to see myself how global climate change has disproportionately affected women and young girls, from Indonesia to India to I don't know where else I should mention with the short time we have at our disposal. While South Africa has done a lot of work to address climate change, gender is still being overlooked in drafting climate change policies and using women as change agents in poor communities to mitigate the impacts of climate change. I was there when we were talking about how we should have a center that must be taking care of adaptation resources. Until the late Minister Edna Molewa passed on, I kept asking, but where is that adaptation money? The last, it was a contest between South Korea and Namibia as to where the center will be. But there are pledges that would amount to about 100 billion. I don't know where the money is. Maybe the governor of the Reserve Bank will tell us where the money is. Because where I live, I haven't seen the money. This symposium sheds light to an issue not often understood and discussed in the media. It is that weather patterns were an act of God, so to say. But with increased industrialization, deforestation, overfishing, carbon emissions, one of the biggest threats affecting women today is climate change. But like all other challenges, patriarchy makes sure that we just become the add-on victims. In the State of the World Population Report, it says, given women's significance of 2009, given women's significant engagement in food production and preparation and potential land use to contribute to climate change solutions in developing countries, the close connection between gender, farming, and climate change deserves far much more analysis than it currently receives. Because of the greater poverty, lesser power over their own lives, less recognition of their economic productivity, and their disproportionate burden in reproduction and child raising. Women face additional challenges as climate changes, close quote. I am talking to experts who are aware that climate change affects women more profoundly, because women happen to be also in majority in the world. Well, in South Africa, the population here, it's 52% more women than men. So we are not calling for enmity between men and women, but partnership, real partnership. Not partnership of bringing the Yolas to life, but partnership of making sure that they live in safe and climate-smart environments. As often, women bear the brunt of extreme weather events because they lack economic, political, and legal power, especially in developing countries like ours. But one thing we have in common, I don't know if it's the worldwide, but in the continent, is come elections time, we remember and we know where women live. Post that, they must go back to where they belong. You know where I mean. The women who live in poor rural communities use natural resources in a different way than men because they possess fewer assets. It is women, for example, who are responsible for collecting firewood, as you said earlier on, fetching water, growing food, and making all those who are climate vulnerable feel taken care of. Furthermore, women are not a homogeneous group. Therefore, climate change will affect them differently, depending on their economic, environmental, cultural, and social situations and context. a growing number of studies point out the need to recognize the importance of this difference as crucial to understanding vulnerability of all women. When I was a Minister of International Relations, we started a get-together, which was started by Madam Hillary Clinton, of just having lunch as women. I almost fell off my chair when one woman said, well, she didn't realize how important it was for her to belong to a group like this, because in a country, this is not important. I would not mention the name of the country, but it was not an African country. So, women and men differ in their roles, behaviors, and attitudes regarding actions that could help to mitigate climate and adapt to climate change. A lot of literature shows that in many countries, men consume more energy than women, particularly for private transport, while women are often responsible for most of the household consumer decisions, including and in relation to where do we find food, water, and household energy. In the villages like mine, where I come from, women wake up early still, even with the support of government. They think they should keep helping themselves out because they want to do what they know best. Save, do much with less, and so on. So when there are droughts and rivers and wells run dry, the mostly affected and the one first to feel the pinch is women. In addition to this, it is essential that we understand that relationships between the effects of climate change and the persistence of violence against women, including through harmful socio-cultural practices, such as the one that she will fight against again. There are no girl children here in our constitution that are allowed to get married or to be taken away before they are 18. So, but it's not a given if we do not share this amongst ourselves as experts and in particular women. When Hurricane Katrina happened, we thought surely leaders around those countries would start saying things differently. And we thought it was a bit far away from home. Then earthquake in Haiti. Then floods in Mozambique. Then again floods in the middle of Zimbabwe. And hundreds of people were unaccounted for. As if that was enough, floods are always, as El Nino and La Nina would be, floods are followed by droughts. Now, people don't know where to get their next meals, but they also did not know what had happened to them yesterday. So that which has happened in Mozambique, as neighbors, we still feel in Zimbabwe that we are obliged to feel the pain and we need to help in the cleanup and the post-effect. All the challenges, lack of nutrition, lack of access to water, inability to access proper sanitation is still a problem here in South Africa. Remember South Africa, here in my country, people fought for freedom for more than 300 years. We are only free in the 25 years. So it means that we have just started a journey ourselves. But we work together as SADC, as Africa, for us to reach the Millennium Goals, Sustainable Development Goals, Africa works as one. I have worked with ministers of environment in the continent. They call themselves AMSHEN. I know that they try and do things together. They are not all women. Some are men, and a lot of men learn a lot from their female counterparts. But as for South Africa, let me repeat, we have just started a journey, but we do not have time to look the other way because we are African. We have to work with each other. In this country, we have signed on the Sustainable Development Goals. We have our own National Development Goals 2030. We also signed on the Africa Agenda Africa 2063. I don't know how old Yola would be in 2063. How old would you be? No. You'll be like maybe my age now. But you have started at the right time. So we are truly happy and feel empowered that you've chosen us as your venue for this meeting. But we should, as we do that, work with you and other bodies that signed on Sustainable Development Goals, but also remember that patriarchy, as I said earlier on, is the biggest enemy for us to become climate smart. Because everything else, if you do not have the power to change things around, it means you are going to have to be the follower. I keep saying to my boy children, when I say let's fight patriarchy, I don't mean let's fight you. You did not create patriarchy. You were born in it. So just don't do things patriarchal. Follow me. Do things like me. And then if you have uncles around who are progressive, okay, work with them. But let's help our people not only to be climate smart, but let's all work with each other to make poverty globally history. We shouldn't arrive in one city and people have everything they want, and then arrive somewhere else, people are chasing locusts, or else they would not have a protein dish. This is not going to make the world a peaceful place. This is not the time we should be having trade wars, because whether we like it or not, they contribute to challenges of climate change. Because people are going to have to maneuver their way out to be able to afford this or the other. I just want to say once again that when you make your conclusions, we should also be reminding each other in the 3 days as to the money for adaptation and this continent. How is it being utilized? Do we know the whereabouts? Are the withdrawals made the way they should? So that when we talk of climate change and how we should be responding and adapting, we also get the support. The support, we were told it's not a promise that it was there. This is the time, this is the hour. The time for the climate change vulnerables to be supported so that they continue believing in humanity. I thank you very much for the opportunity.
Minister, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Honourable Minister, and thank you once again for taking time to be with us. And I think most importantly for reminding us that behind that term gender, there are the lived realities of individual women who are really struggling with multiple burdens of poverty, unemployment, and climate change. And also reminding us that we need to keep our eye on the money and understand that as governments take on climate adaptation, there is a cost for this, and we must work together to ensure that those initiatives are fully funded. So thank you once again. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our opening speakers, and please show your appreciation. I thank you all very much for being with us, and I think for starting us off today in such an inspiring way. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks. Thank you. So now we're moving on into our next session, and I hope we still have all our participants with us online, as this is going to be your opportunity now to ask some questions as well. So I'd like to hand over to our moderator for our next session, Dr. Catherine Sozi, who is the Regional Director for UNAIDS for East and Southern Africa.
Good morning, everybody. Wasn't that inspiring? Say it's inspiring and sound inspired. Come on. I know it's Monday morning, but that was really a good introduction into what we want to do next, which is really go into the practical issues of unpacking everything that has been said. And so I would like to reiterate what Yola said, already living in this future that everyone fears. That is a reminder for those of us who are privileged. Yes, I'm looking at all of you, I'm looking at myself, and trying to get us to remember that when we say climate change, it means different things to different people, but it's really about people's lives and people where they're living in their communities, and that everybody wants the same things. Everybody wants the same quality of life. So to take us straight into this, because you've had excellent introduction from the Honourable Minister, the Regional Director, Julita, and from Yola, this next session is really getting us to understand the importance of population and development, the issues of sexual and reproductive health and rights that you deal with, gender, etc., for climate change, with an emphasis on climate impacts and adaptation, and trying to recognize how we elevate these priorities in the work that we do at the country level, based on the strong partnerships that have been called for. I'm aware also that we're live streaming, and so we have to run very quickly through this program, because not only will we have eminent speakers, and I want to call them to the front to come up, but we've got one person who is on remote link already, ready to be part of this. So I'd like to call Dr. Benoit Kalasa. Are you there? Are they online?
Good afternoon.
Good morning.
Yes. I'm totally awake.
Thank you very much. I would like to call Sizwe. I'll get back to you just in a few minutes. Sizwe Magwaza Kulekani. Yes, please, can you come and take your seat up here? And then, of course, our eminent visitor from Malawi, Dr. Dalitso Kabambe, please join us at the front. Mr. Ben Lulin-Jones, please join us. And Cecilia Njenga, who is sitting right at the back, please come right to the front so that we can proceed. And as they're taking their places, I'll just very quickly introduce them so that we get straight into hearing them rather than hearing me. So Dr. Benoit Kalasa, and colleagues from UNFPA will know him well. He's the Technical Division Director at UNFPA, having previously served as Director of UNFPA Regional Office for Western Central Africa from 2013 to 2015. And he has motivated and led the UNFPA team into developing innovative approaches for interventions in issues related to population and development and sexual and reproductive health, including gender. Then we've got maybe I will start from... So Dr. Benoit Kalasa, thank you very much for being patient with us as we get online. Then we've got Mr. Kolekani Magwaza, who is from the South African Youth Climate Change Coalition, a true young person. He is only 28 years old, so he's half my age, never mind. He's a climate justice activist and is Secretary General of the South African Youth Climate Change Coalition, a council member in the Lutheran World Federation, serving in Theology and Public Witness Council Committee, and is an ACT Alliance Climate Change Advisory Group member. Thank you very much for joining us. And then we've got Dr. Dalitso Kabambe, thank you very much for coming, the governor for the Reserve Bank of Malawi, as earlier said. And as governor, we spent some time up in the room, and he will be talking to us about his responsibility for providing strategic direction leadership. He'll have some economics and some data that really make the convincing case for why we're here and why we need to move forward with what we're talking about today. And I've got Mr. Ben Llewellyn-Jones, as already introduced, British Deputy High Commissioner based here in South Africa, and he has worked in Nigeria, Rwanda, Burundi. He's been Deputy Head of Climate Change and Energy Group based in London. And then we've got our very own Cecilia Njenga, who's the head of the United Nations Environment Office, and is an economist, urban regional planner with over 25 years of progressive work experience. So, the way we're going to do this, and I know I've got a time manager somewhere, is to go directly into the speakers. A few questions, but mainly... So, and I'll be a little bit strict with time because we've got people online, and there'll be an opportunity to have a Q&A at the end of the session. So we'll start with Dr. Benoit Kalasa. And maybe you will build on to what the previous speakers have said on why it is so vital that we move forward on ICPD and climate change now, at this moment, and how ICPD can contribute to building truly, and it's really truly climate resilient societies in this continent. And I'd just like to say to all the panelists, I think that the issue of language is key as we move forward. Let us try and simplify it so that we actually are all on the same page. I know Cecilia is probably used to all this language, but I think that if we've got young people in the room and we want to take the messages forward, that we try as much as possible to build on that. So, Doctor, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues. And I think from what I plan to speak to, I have a couple of points. Mostly to start with clarifying why we need better understanding of the relationship between population and climate change. I think without that, we cannot have sound policies and projects that will protect people's rights. And for us as UNEPA, their reproductive choices, as Julita said, and so that we can preserve the planet. What we've done is that usually the claim that population growth, especially in the poorest country, is a primary driver of climate change. We need to question that and to look at that with a lot of skepticism, because we should note that it is people who live in the poorest country who suffer most from the impact of climate change. I think the Honorable Minister spoke to that, and the young lady, Yola, whom I salute, also reminded us about that. What we know, on the contrary, that we can confirm that climate change is undermining the progress and threatening the achievement of the ICPD promises. So these are, for me, like a starting point from which we need to start our conversations here. The Center for Research on Epidemiological and Disasters tell us that the number of natural disasters has tripled between 1980 and 2020. Although there has been a small decline, still the number have doubled between the last 25 years. So in most cases, what we see is that we have 1 or 3 events that come with a large-scale disaster and cause a lot of deaths. So as we embark in this 2 days and a half conversation, there are some keywords that we need to keep in mind. One is impact, the other is about vulnerability, and of course, adaptation, resilience, and I might add, justice. I think there is a justice around that. The question from the Honorable Minister was, where is the money for adaptation going? I think that is the whole issue about the justice. So the framework that I would like us to look at as we move to Cairo is as follows. What is the overlap between population dynamics, the response to natural disaster, and adaptation to climate change? That is one. The second is, how do we address the impact of natural disaster and climate change, and how that is being distributed between the different age groups of the population? And third, how coping strategies vary according to different demographics. Of course, the age, the sex, and the place where we live. The person living in Limpopo will be different and differently impacted than the person living in Dakar or Kinshasa. So for many humanitarian activists, we know that the needs are mounting, including for life-saving sexual and reproductive health and gender-based violence prevention and response. As a community working on humanitarian, we know that we cannot afford to continue to respond. What we need is to reduce people's vulnerability. We need to increase their resilience. Last year, when we looked at the data from 1994 to 2019, we found this year in our report on the ICPD that the data on population and emission show that slowing population growth, even rapidly, is not a shortcut to preventing climate change. Indeed, it will have little or no effect if we cannot transition away from fossil fuels and other drivers of climate change and towards renewable and sustainable modes of living. It is critical that we get smart about the relationship between population and climate change and make the best policy choices to avoid the pitfall of the past. The program of action of the ICPD was advanced to protect women and men from abuses of reproductive rights, consequence of widespread concern over population growth. I think this is an area that I will invite all the participants and the experts especially to reflect on during the coming days. Investments promoting the realization of universal access to sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights, including the education of women and girls, and a major expansion in sexual and reproductive health education, information and health services, and more, result in people choosing smaller families, and later, fertility will decline. ICPD has been driving investment in the population. We need to recognize that investments in sexual and reproductive health and rights, gender equality, population development are a vital part of building resilience to climate change through human capital, health, rights, and empowerment. Life-saving measures in climate emergencies and long-term demographic, economic, and environmental dividend for health, educated, employed, and empowered population. So the most thing that we need to look at here is how do we leverage the presence and the community, the engagement we have with the community, So what I would like to do, moderator, is to leave some challenges for reflection. One is there is a lack of consensus between those who have the money and the applicant about whether development activities count as adaptation. The second is the need for the family planning and reproductive health practitioners and advocates to be parts of the country-driven adaptation stakeholders engagement processes. And third, for the same community, the family planning and reproductive health community, to know more about the processes of adaptation, the financing architecture around climate change. And I understand and I know that we are not very familiar with these processes. Unless we get familiar, we cannot engage. So we can overcome the narrow interpretation of women's empowerment in adaptation strategy. So these are my few remarks to start with. We know enough about the connection between the ICPD and climate change. As well, we are going to hear from colleagues, from experts these coming days. We are most urgently here to discuss how to act based on this connection and ensure that these two priority agenda move faster together. When I listened to Yola opening this, I could not regret for being awake at 3 a.m. because that is what we want. It is the engagement at this early age. And I was thinking of my own daughter. For the past 4 years, they have organized this. They call it the UNIS UN model, where out of 4 conferences, 2 were on climate change. The last one this year was water. So when we discuss this, let's bear in mind that it is about water shortage, about food supply, about the movement of population, migration as a coping mechanism. Let me pause here and greeting to my fellow panels and looking forward to listen to you. Over to you, Madam.
Thank you very much, Dr. Benoit Kalasa, and for that introduction and really coming down to the language towards the end, focusing on young people. And it's a great move now to ask Sizwe Magwaza, who is the Secretary General of the South African Youth Climate. Doctor talked about reducing people's vulnerabilities, increasing people's resilience, getting smart. And I think that around the world we see young people like yourselves and Yola really driving the action on climate action. How would you explain, or how can youth continue to expand their leadership? This continent is mainly young people now. In a lot of countries, young people are the majority of the populace. And what links do you see with ICPD on your action that can expand the investments in youth, health, the rights, the education, and that would boost this leadership role? Maybe you could just say something. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. Hello, everyone. Everyone who's here and everyone who's online. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the youth and on behalf of my organization. My organization is a network of young environmentalist and climate justice activists. It's based in 5 cities here in South Africa, and now we are more than 5 years. So I'm happy that the organization is growing and the mandate is continually growing. Talking about the youth climate action or the youth climate momentum that is growing around the world. Yes, it is growing, and I think we now have more recognition than we usually have in the previous years, since this few initiatives, the youth initiatives such as the Fridays for Future or the climate strikes started last year. I think the momentum grew of the youth getting to know about what is climate change and getting to know about the reality of climate change, climate crisis. But I think sometimes it is good to make clear, to define what climate action is, because these marches that we are doing on Fridays, they are not really climate action. And I'm saying that because all these initiatives that we are championing, that we are driving as young people, they did not just start now, they did not start last year. It's something that has been happening for years. And now they are gaining more momentum. The climate action that we want to see as the one is the action that actually talks to the policies, the adequate policies and legislations that enable or that enforces climate action, that enforces the achievement of the medium and long-term goals. What are the medium and long-term goals? It's the Sustainable Development Goals, and it is the Paris Agreement. So last year there was a report from IPCC about the 1.5 degrees Celsius, and this is one of the things that drive us as young people. As we are doing the strikes, we're calling on everyone to take climate action as recommended by or from the climate science. And then this year, there was another report from the Global Environment Outlook that talks to the Sustainable Development Goals, saying that we are nowhere near reaching those goals. We are nowhere near protecting our environment. We are nowhere near protecting our people, protecting our species, and everything that is related to it. So the action that we want to see, and what we are doing in my organization as SAYCCC, is that we are studying the climate policies and the legislations that are related to climate change and environment. We want to identify the gaps, and after that we want to identify the solutions. We want to identify how will we close the gaps, and that is climate action for us. The current policies that are existing, as far as we know and as far as we have studied them, they are not adequate to respond to climate change. And I'm saying that because they don't. For instance, the climate in South Africa, there is a draft climate change bill, and we made a submission last year to the Department of Environmental Affairs, addressing it to say one of its objectives speaks to the benefits of the people, but not the benefits of the biodiversity, and not the benefit of the rights of the Mother Earth. And some of the things is that the legislations that we have, they are not quantitative enough to enable us to meet the goals. You know, they are not. They don't count the years. If we really are serious about meeting the climate change goals, we should be saying by 2030 we will reduce our carbons by this number, and by 2050 we will reach that number. So that is the climate action that we want. The climate action that we want is not the one that is only about getting in the street, calling for climate justice. That is advocacy on climate justice, but that is not climate action. And I think that is how we can expand the climate the climate action.
Okay, and you've mentioned 2030 is just around the corner.
Yeah.
11 more years to go, so there's need to have some fast track on how all of us are going to work towards that. And you know, changing policy and legislation takes time, so some of this action that needs to be done is quite critical. Then let me move to Mr. Dalit Sokabambe. And I was in Malawi actually in May, just after the floods or during the flooding time. And I know that you've got a history working as in Ministry of Health. What are some of the climate change related threats Malawi faces? And as a former part of Ministry Health, what health impacts have you seen, and what do you expect from climate-related threats? So now we're talking about the real people issue, and from a foreign affairs perspective, and also coming from where you are at the moment, how is Malawi engaging on these issues and with other countries in the region? Because it's one thing having a flood in Mozambique, but it happens in Zimbabwe, happens in Zambia, happens in Malawi, there's drought in Namibia, Lesotho. It's a regional, it's beyond your borders. What can you say for that? Oh yes, and I forgot to say, of course, as an economist, she's got slides. So can we have the slides up? And I think you've got the clip that moves them on, and he will talk to us with the data. Thank you.
Thank you so much. As the clip is coming through, I would respond first and foremost by looking at the climate change threat. How is it working? Click next.
There we are. Yeah, it's come.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much. Climate change, as already highlighted by the Honourable Minister, as well as Her Excellency Julita, it's a global phenomenon. Probably it's the greatest challenge of our time. And I'm pleased to be joined by excellencies and colleagues in two key areas. Sexual and reproductive health area. You must be congratulated for the excellent work done, because figures are there to show. Similarly, UNAIDS, where you come from, the response on HIV/AIDS has really been quite a fantastic job. These two aside, I think the choice of this conference and symposium, climate change, is probably the biggest threat of our time. And if I come straight to a point, I want to use the case of Malawi to explain my point. And this is from independence 1964, 1965 to 6, all the way to 2020, where we are approaching. As we can see, that's the story that in the past 56 years, Malawi has gone through recessions 7 times. And all the recessions are explained by climate change. Drought and flooding. And over the years, the episodes of drought and flooding, they have increased in intensity and frequency. In Africa, we can categorize countries in Africa into 2. Countries that are resource intensive, they have oil, or they have metals, gold, platinum, and so forth. Commodity prices becomes an issue to those. And the rest of the other countries are agriculture dependent. When there is a flooding and drought, that economy is down on the ground. And what we have seen in Malawi, which will be exactly other agriculture dependent economies in the continent, every other year we are down. Climate change is a drag on our economies. It's a drag. We have failed to move, and we are failing to progress. One single factor, climate change. Moving on to the next slide. Okay. As a result of this, before I go to the next one, as a result of this, Malawi's GDP per capita has moved from around $100 in 1965 to around $400. As I said, the key drag that explains per capita earning is purely flooding, is purely climate change. Over the same period, countries elsewhere, I will give examples of South Korea, Singapore, Malaysia, China, because of a more balanced nature of their economies. Their per capita incomes have risen over the same period from the same $100. We are at the same level, 1965. They are now at some of them 40,000, 50,000, 60,000 per capita per annum of income earnings. Whereas in Malawi, we are at $400. The major drag on us, which is refusing us to move forward, is climate change. At household level, what does it mean? At household level, it means that whether it's a male or female-headed household or child-headed household, they have tried everything. They were depending on growing maize, growing cassava, growing cotton, and selling. Because of climate change, they are no longer able to do that. They are producing less and they are simply earning less, and they cannot send their children to school and provide for their children. As a result, they are a poor society because of climate change as a fact. I made a point, when we look at SRH indicators, there has been a tremendous success. Malawi it's a shining star in terms of maternal mortality. It was rising at the beginning from 1977, rising quite rapidly, but Her Excellency Julita and others came in, worked with us. We have broken that and we are going, well, it's a success story. We can say the same for infant, neonatal, and the under 5 mortality rates. They have all gone down quite substantially from 1965 because of the work of the team around here. There is, though, a challenge, which we are calling in Malawi victims of our success. That as we are making a tremendous effort on reducing maternal mortality, infant, under 5, neonatal mortality rates, population is picking up. We've moved from just around 6 million, we are at 18 million, and we are projecting 50 million by 2050, and almost 100 million by 129 million by 2100. And that's a challenge, and yet it's a small country. What is that doing? Of course, fertility is also not going as much down as one would have wanted it to see it going down. What that has done, whereas climate change is indeed a global issue, there are global players who are contributing to it, and Malawi is simply a victim of that. But at local level, the growth in the population is a challenge. It is a challenge because the resources around are being overused. We are over-cultivating, the forests are retreating. As a result of forest cover retreating because we want to extend area under cultivation, what is happening is that the rivers are now also retreating. The lake, which is the 3rd largest lake in Africa, is also retreating. But also desertification is cropping in, but also crop output is coming up. So the impact of population growth, even at local level, never mind the global climate change caused by emissions elsewhere, but at the local level, as populations are growing, there is a challenge at local level too. That is an issue to also be dealt with. So there is a global challenge which the Honorable Minister ably said we needed to deal with that, the global rising emissions and so forth. We needed to decisively deal with. The COP21 was a hope. It never materialized into a reality. It's a high time we deal with that, because if it doesn't deal with, our economies will continue to be under siege of climate change. At local level, we need to deal with the issues of population. Deal aggressively with them. Yes, SRH has improved, but it's a success, but we're ending up seeing it as a victim of our success, because now population is at threat. We need to deal with the issue of population growth. My last point would be girl-child education. It is very, very crucial. We have established that as long as a girl child is educated and empowered, we have statistics in Malawi that shows that a girl who has gone past secondary school, their fertility level is 2.3. A girl who has not gone past secondary school, their fertility is 6 point something, 6.7. By educating a girl child and empowering her, what it means, we are going to reverse all the population challenges, and that Malawi, small as it is, at local level, we'll start to deal with our own climate change issues and move forward. I thought I would support in that direction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kabambe. And maybe while you still have the mic, and you've really talked about the need for a regional approach, that it's really just beyond just Malawi trying to sort out. Are there any efforts on Malawi engaging with other countries in this region or the world to prepare for and adapt to these threats yet? Or is it something that because I'm trying to look at things that come out of this symposium as we move forward. What would you suggest?
First and foremost, I would still go to my point that the global community, we need to come together, revitalize the COP21 agreements. And the issue which was raised, where's the money? It's very, very to deal with the global warming issue, because that goes a long way in addressing at local level, at a SADC level. We really need to discuss this, because as already highlighted, last year, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Mozambique were heavily affected by flooding. Partly, it's because of the structures that are out there. We've cut down the vegetation, which could have held back some of the water as it was coming. We've damaged our local ecosystems. They are no longer the way they are. Some of the rivers that used to take water into their natural pathways to be moved out, they have all silted because we have cut down the trees, and all of them now, the sand has gone into all these rivers and affected. Those are regional level developments. We can work together to ensure that we have ecosystems, revived ecosystem, and that they are back to where they were in 1960s or before that, so that we can deal with these challenges even at the local level before we look at even the global level as it is.
Thank you very much for that, and I think that is very important. I want to move now swiftly on to Mr. Ben Jones. How is the UK engaging across Africa in this climate resilience and also in the sexual and reproductive health and gender empowerment? And what are your expectations or aspirations around the ICPD on this? Do you have a mic, or shall I pass the mic? Yeah. Okay.
I do now. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for being invited to join the panel, and it's been inspirational so far. And reading the statistics is both challenging but exciting. It's quite a busy slide the governor put up, but I think as he explained it, you could see exactly the impact that climate change has had and across the continent. I'm Ben. I'm the British Deputy High Commissioner to South Africa. As you mentioned, I've worked in Nigeria, Rwanda, and Burundi, and in different ways, I think I've seen the impact of climate change, but also the importance of sexual and reproductive health rights when it comes to those countries, very different countries, but to be honest, some challenges in common. I mean, you ask about the UK's approach, and the first thing is we have 4 strategic priorities for Africa, 2 of which are climate change and the importance of realising the demographic dividend. And I think both of these things come together in this conversation, this symposium. And that's not by accident. It's because statistically we can see both of those issues, one as a challenge, one as an opportunity if addressed in the correct way, but 2 fundamental and vital to the future of Africa and to Africans. And our support is genuine in that respect. We've been invited by the UN Secretary General to co-lead on climate resilience and adaptation. We've talked about that briefly today, but we'll be leading on that, co-leading on that at the UN Climate Action Summit very shortly. And again, that reaffirms our commitment ahead of, we hope, co-hosting the COP next year in the UK with Italy. When I worked on climate change, and you alluded to this, it was ahead of the Copenhagen COP. And it struck me then not just the optimism that people felt, but the belief that action needed to be taken then. But it took some time, actually, until Paris came around. And I think what we're experiencing now is the need not just to believe we should take action, but realize that action in what I think is a more challenging international context. And I think we can all understand why that is. And I think that puts more pressure on us, but in the right way, to show how we can take action and to show how these incidents, which we can all recount in dramatic and increasing number, are not just signs of a problem that we should observe, but indications of action we should take. I was struck by, I was reading over the weekend about the, I think it was the first glacier to disappear in Greenland, and the plaque that was put up, which says something like, we knew what was happening, did we do anything about it? And I think the question is the correct one, but the question is really one we should pose to ourselves. I'm also a father of a daughter, and when you look 25 years ahead, as we look 25 years back to the ICPD, I think the right question is, what did we do? What do we do now? And how do we take that action? So we're very proud, to answer your question, that we have committed to spending £225 million a year up to 2022 on sexual and reproductive health programs. That's a contribution intended to galvanise others, and I recognise that it's only a contribution. We're also committed to increasing our climate adaptation funding. And again, I think there is a genuine question about how that is applied, not just across Africa, but across the world, and how others can match that. And I think for us, showing not just by our words, but by our own actions, that this is an issue that we take seriously. So those of you who follow the National Grid on Twitter, I might be the only one in this room who does that, but I do. If you go to the National Grid, it has a tweet, I think every day, showing how many hours of energy production in the UK is a consequence of coal. And I'll confess, some days they managed to get for days, hours, weeks, I think months at one time without any energy production from coal. Sometimes not so good. But I think it's that kind of systemic, practical decarbonisation of our energy that will make a difference, and that can make a difference. And showing by our actions that in the UK, reducing our carbon emissions by 80% by 2050 will be done, can be done by doing those kind of things. Can we show others that is the way ahead? So that's our contribution. I'm delighted to answer any questions that we have as we go along. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to appreciate some of the examples, because I think that some of the data, the way it's presented in ordinary households, is what will motivate everybody to be on the same agenda. I'm assuming that everybody in this room is on the same page, but there are people who may not be on the same page, and we need to just make it simple and make it part of our everyday lives. So as we move ahead into what needs to happen around the advocacy agenda, let us think about the partnerships we need to make with the young people in particular. The language they use is very different to what you and I use, but I think that the engagement is key. And then now I want to go to Cecilia Njenga, who is the head of UNEP here in South Africa. And mine is, and I'm sure you know that the UN is bringing together the whole progress towards the Sustainable Development Agenda. But how does this Sustainable Development, humanitarian, climate agendas, how do they come together? And how is the UN doing that specifically, not only just for South Africa, but on the continent wide? And how do we bridge these connections?
Thank you very much. First to say that UNEP is really delighted to be part and to participate in this panel, given our role as a non-resident agency and as an integrator of environmental sustainability and climate change in the action at the national level. We're really happy to be here. This coming climate summit that the Secretary General is organizing has called upon us, actually as UNEP, to lead work around nature-based solution to climate change. And I think this is really significant based on what the governor has just said. I said, he's really just given it all, and I was really excited just to listen to you talking about this, given your leadership position within a country, within Africa. And I think, and I'll just start by saying that before coming to UNEP, I worked in UN Habitat, where I worked with city mayors. And at that time, and actually my last COP was Copenhagen, where I worked with city mayors from across Africa and bringing them to Copenhagen to strengthen the role of local government. Because as you've said, rightly said, Governor, it's the action at local level sometimes, no, not all the times, that will bring transformation. We may focus in the global negotiations, which is indeed our right to get involved and to participate in global negotiations. And I must say that Africa negotiators for climate change have really been a united force, have really been really committed in terms of ensuring that we do have a common position when we go to the climate change COPs. However, it's at local government level. And a question that I always received from city mayors when we presented, and this like 15 years ago, or 20 years ago actually, and we would present all these projections in terms of statistics of what we should expect in the next 20, 50 years in terms of sea level rise. And very quickly, the mayors, given their term in office, which is normally in some countries 4 or 5 years, their interest will be, when will that sea level rise happen and take on perhaps some of the assets that city mayor owns in that coastal city. You know, it will be very much dependent on, you know, what losses does it bring to me, but not looking at the bigger picture and the long-term agenda. We spent 2 weeks ago in Harare, 48 African countries, looking at the frameworks that countries have committed to. These are called the nationally determined considerations. This is really the frameworks that countries have developed, where they have placed their programs of action and the ambitions they want to take in order to ensure that, you know, we do not meet that 2-degree level rise. Catherine Sozi told me, don't use those technologies. But I'll give you demonstrations of what even a slight increase in temperature would have huge impacts to our health and our well-being. It's that serious. And I think many of us who are here, particularly those of us in South Africa today, we know that the winter season was longer. I mean, I've been here several years and I have seen, you know, a lengthened summer throughout, increasing. I have hardly used my overcoat, which in 2011, when I came to South Africa, you know, I used to use it during winter. And therefore, what impacts this have had. The minister today was saying she's having, you know, a cough, and let's excuse her for her cough. I've been suffering from pollen. As soon as the temperatures rise, there is huge impact on air pollution. But back to what the African countries are doing with their nationally determined considerations. What we have found is that these frameworks have been developed, and because they are voluntary, and this is very significant for the discussions we are having. If we are to achieve our sustainable development goals, if we have to achieve real climate change action, we cannot go on to being voluntary, you know, making voluntary commitments. The evidence and the data and the information out there is fluid. It's you know, you could see it. I would see, for instance, you know, a country like Uganda has committed to increasing or reducing their greenhouse carbon emissions by 2050 by 20%. Zimbabwe, on the other hand, has committed to 35%. Kenya has committed to 15%. They're more, you know, South Africa has committed to 35% greenhouse gas emissions. But the real question is, how do you come to those figures? You know, what have you taken into consideration? When you look at most of those nationally determined considerations, they're mainly on the mitigation side. What does mitigation mean? Mitigation is mainly taking actions, for instance, very recently, which are very good actions. We have seen Ethiopia plant 350 million trees across the country, you know. We have seen transitions, for instance, in the country I come from in Kenya, moving towards 50% geothermal energy. You know, these are real actions, require huge amounts of investments, and I'm really happy to hear the United Kingdom is making huge commitments, and we hope others will follow suit. But what does this really mean in real terms? Africa is one of the highest urbanizing continents in the world. And therefore, we are looking, if you travel across the cities in Africa, we are using transport modes that are heavily polluting. We're using not clean fuel. What does this mean to our expectant mother who continues to inhale, air pollution, polluted air? What does this mean in terms of the growth of informal settlements, many of which do not have access to basic services? Clean water, they're using firewood or kerosene in non-ventilated environments. What does this mean to an expectant mother, to a young child? These are the real things that we really need to integrate in our nationally determined considerations. We really need to bring in the human face. We need to bring in the vulnerable person within the household, the elderly, that pregnant woman, that young child that is still growing and still has a future. And I'm one of the great supporters of the climate action by the young people. We cannot continue talking about the severity of climate change and not taking into consideration that those that we are polluting the air for, those that we are destroying our mother nature for, are the young people. That we continue to say that they are the future leaders of tomorrow. They will not be there. How can they be there when we have destroyed the fundamentals of life, which is the planet, the nature, and Mother Nature for that matter? So I think as a UN, we have to connect the dots. We have to work together, because climate change is not an environmental issue. It's an issue that impacts on not our health, on our rights as human beings. It impacts also, and it's connected to the financing. It's connected to the various sectors that really underpin a sustainable development. And therefore, I think the call from the Secretary General is very clear. We have a responsibility as a UN, as we provide support for an integrated approach for the implementation of SDGs, as we support countries in developing and implementing their national development frameworks, that we do not just go sectoral, and that we comprehensively support an integrated approach, because everything is very much connected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, very much, Cecilia and Jenga. That was very motivating, and a promise that all of us as those who belong to the multilateral system can be held accountable for. We're already living in the future that everyone fears. That's what Yola said. I keep going back to that, and it's really real. Climate change impacts on everything that we want to achieve for everybody across the globe, and hence the SDGs. And if we don't do that, then we are not going to achieve all the goals and targets that we have set out to achieve. And that the most marginalized, all of you have gone on about that the most marginalized women and girls and other most vulnerable people will be left behind. And it may not be the people sitting in this room, but that not everybody is at the same starting point, and that we mustn't leave people behind. And that the data that you presented, excellent, but to reaffirm that we must involve communities to inform the data, and involve localized data that is relevant to the household. And it's the only way we can get that participation of all stakeholders, whether it's around the sexual and reproductive health and rights, the gender-based violence, gender equality and empowerment, but that it's the vulnerabilities that we want to address. And so all of us need to be part of it. Now I'm told, or there was supposed to be a Q&A. I just want to check, because I was told that at a similar symposium we forgot the people online. So I just want to check if there, oh yes, there's online audience questions, and then I'll get back to you if you don't mind. And these questions really go to the members of the panel. There they are. I think some of them may have been answered. Like the first one is, why is this symposium significant at this particular moment? I feel that it has been answered, unless it's not very clear. But other people in the audience may want to answer that. Is there anybody who feels that there's a particular point we haven't dealt with on why we're here? If not, then I will move to the second one, which is really around members, not only of the panel, but from the audiences. What mechanisms are needed to ensure that this symposium achieves its intended goals? And we'll get back to Julita and her team and all the country directors to say, okay, and maybe that will come out over the course of the symposium on what it is that you go back with. And how do you strike a balance? And we've heard about Malawi, we've talked about the youth. Strike a balance between hunger, poverty, and all the other issues that we need to sort out to address climate change in an environment where financial resources are extremely strained. That is a fundamental question. I think it's been mentioned on and off, and I think we targeted you, Lorraine Jones, on saying, so where is the money? The governor of the Bank of Malawi, and where do we need to reach out? But I was just wondering whether there's anybody in the audience who may want to respond to that, or do I go back to the panel? Gentleman sitting in the back, you had your hand up. Okay, you had a question. Does anybody have any input into what I've just asked around question 3? Otherwise, I'll go back to the panel. Governor, I'll start with you.
Thank you so much. I think hunger and poverty are things that are caused by climate change to a large extent. Empirical evidence is there. To address issues of climate change where resources are constrained, resources always being a constraint. But I think it's about how do we, going back to the point, local level, household level, what role can we play? Do we cut down this tree or plant more trees? The amount of money may not be quite large at that level of leaving that tree uncut or planting another tree. It may not be that much. So sometimes we are looking for these big announcements at COP21. So many trillions will be available for this. But I think the story should be what can be done at household level to keep that tree or plant more trees, because the devastation is really happening at that level, and cumulatively it's affecting the entire global community. So I think if we look at that level, in the case that I showed, fisheries, to what extent are we overfishing our Lake Malawi? Our small 0.1 of a hectare, to what extent are we removing all the trees from that for us to cultivate? What effort are we doing to control the number of people in our household so that we do not expand area to cultivate? By simply dealing with the number of children per mother, we will reduce the amount of acreage that we must clear for planting crops. So some of these may not require huge resources. It's about, in agriculture, this is smart agriculture. What is it that we can do that we change our systems? Can we grow our crops together with the trees, which they call agro-processing, agroforestry? Can we change? You may not need a lot of money in doing that, but if we are looking for somebody just to pump in money like that, we may not get it. Okay. We may waste our time. I think the issue is, can we find other ways of doing things much better with our resources whilst maintaining our ecosystems and environment?
Okay, then maybe I'll just ask the young person. What do you think of that response?
That's going to be you. Well, let me just respond to the question and then I'll come back to that. I'm thinking of this question number 3, and I think it talks about the link between addressing hunger, poverty, and climate change. So generally what climate change does is that it has impacts such as drought, and then it has impact such as the global warming, and then to an extent whereby it talks to our health. And then and as a result, then there is hunger and poverty. And what this thing does is that it creates imbalances in our communities. So that I think hunger and poverty, they create imbalances in our societies, maybe as a country or as a region, and then that is what climate change also does. It creates imbalances between the communities and between the people. And the people who are most vulnerable or who are more poor would be more poorer because of these impacts or of these challenges. And the people who are who are resourceful, if I may say, they will be at a better or at an advantageous situation where, for instance, if there is poverty, if you have money to get food from elsewhere, if it is not in this city, you can go maybe to Johannesburg, or maybe you can go overseas and get what you want if you have money. But those who don't have money will have to stay and I mean think about maybe wait for the next dire situation. So I think that is the balance between these three components. It just creates imbalances between the communities.
Thank you very much. And just not forgetting Dr. Benoit, I was wondering before I move on to our donor sitting on the panel, whether you would have any thoughts on, so how do we handle this where financial resources are strained?
Thank you very much. Let me first comment my fellow panelists on the wisdom they have shared with us. I think there are two issues here that we need to look at. When I listen to my colleague from UNEP, and I think we are looking at mitigation, which is very important for the action that even our friends, the youth fellow, was calling to. But when I listen to the Deputy High Commissioner and the Governor, good to see you after Kigali here. I think we are looking at building resilience of communities. You know, as UNEPA, what we are trying to avoid as we go to Kigali is that when we engage in the conversation around climate change, is to avoid the shortcut, which most of the people, they look at the pace of population growth. But most of us have been alluding to an issue which is at the center of climate change. How do we address the production patterns, being in agriculture, in fishery, and how do you address the consumption pattern, which can also go to the motorcycle we are using, the fuel we are using, that is at the heart of climate change. I think these are the literacy on climate change that this community of reproductive family planning we need to build. So we will continue to partnering with the UK, with JFIT, in empowering women and girls accessing family planning, fighting child marriage. But we need to make sure that the vulnerability of our population will be less now, because we see more and more increasingly the impacts of drought, of floods on women, on old people, and of course on young people who are pushed to migrate and they end up drowning in the Mediterranean. So these are the things that we need to pull together and link climate change and poverty. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones, and then I'll go to the gentleman. Or did you have a question that before we...
No, it's fine. So my question was both for the Deputy High Commissioner as well as the Governor of the Reserve Bank. So ICPD and UNFPA are rights-based organizations. We're rights and justice. That's the language we speak. Many of us don't understand any other language. So I'm asking you in a rights-based thing. So, and if we assume that the high-income countries are those that cause climate change, yeah, or largely. So for the Governor of the Reserve Bank, so if we can say that do you have a right to charge those countries that cause the floods and droughts in your country? From a rights or justice perspective, the drought was caused by somebody else. So do you have a right to send them a check or ask them to cover the damages that they've caused? Like if your house was damaged, I suspect you'd ask the person who damaged it to please try and sort it out. So as far as I understand from the Deputy High Commissioner, the similar question is, as far as I understand, the high-income countries say that Malawi has no right to ask that we pay for the droughts that we've caused. I think that's what you... So could you finish that sentence for us? High-income countries believe that lower ones have no right to ask because. So after because, how does that sentence finish?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Jones. So you've got 2 questions.
That's great.
Oh, you might as well go straight into that.
I might not finish the sentence, so I might start it in a different way. I don't recognise that description. I mean, I think
you're a politician.
No, I'm not. I'm a diplomat, and there is a distinction. I mean, diplomats work on issues over time, and often on intractable issues over time. I'd say climate change is exactly one of those issues, and politicians have to deal with the next 4 or 5 years, whereas we get the privilege of thinking further ahead and helping them to do so. And I think that's why I wouldn't start the sentence that way. I think there's definitely, clearly, an historical legacy of high-emitting countries. Why is the UK trying to reduce its emissions? Because it should, and because it needs to show leadership, and because, frankly, it's financially able to. And that's also very, very important. So, you know, the climate finance that's being made available, the action being taken to encourage other high-emitting countries to reduce their emissions in a tangible way is a response to that. So I do think that funding for adaptation, we've talked about it, and how it's applied and how it's used to make countries, not just in Africa actually, but across the world, more climate resilient, is fundamental to that equation, put it that way, to that calculation. I certainly think that. I don't know if the governor's going to write me a check. I have money on me, but I don't think my outsurance will cover that. But I do think there is a wider financial equation and calculation that we are engaged in. And to be honest, I alluded to it earlier, the international context of that has become more difficult. And so other countries and the UK are trying to find more finance to put towards it in a constrained time. To come back to the question 3, I think it's a sophisticated problem and it requires a sophisticated response. Education, and I do believe that about the girl child, is fundamental to how population over time declines and how people get to make choices about when they have children, which is fundamental. That's one answer. I think the second answer, which is more difficult, but I'll try it, is around how countries that still have to transition, countries like South Africa, from a dependence on coal, do that, and don't make the mistakes that countries like the UK made. So we talk in the UK about the just transition that should have occurred when coal fields were closed, and it didn't occur in the way that it should. Now, countries that still have to make that transition, and they will, can either learn from that, or we can help them with that, or we can talk about that. We can't pretend it doesn't have to happen. We can't pretend that communities will not be impacted by the closure of high-emitting energy producing sources. So I think that the harder answer, to come to your point, is I don't know if we have to pay, perhaps we do, but we certainly have to share experience on what we got wrong and what could be got right and how that can be done better. Thanks.
Right, thank you very much. And yes.
Yes, I was Secretary for Foreign Affairs before I was appointed Governor of the Reserve Bank of Malawi, and these are the things that you would discuss at a global level. And our discussions are that we have sufficient knowledge. We know where we're coming from as a planet. We know where we are. We know where we got it wrong. And we thoroughly understand who are the largest emitters who have contributed to climate challenges we are facing today. It's well understood. And I think there are 2 points to it. First, we must slow down, because we now know what causes climate change. We need to slow down. There are already agreements in place. And I think what we are calling is, can we stick to those agreements? That we must slow down as much as we can. And I think there are commitments on the table to that effect. Secondly, is that countries indeed like Malawi, and indeed households, which the Honourable Minister highlighted, poorer households, who are disproportionately, I think that's what the word that was used, disproportionately affected. How do we support in terms of adaptation to those nations, to those households? And again, they're part of the agreements. What can be done, and the financing has been put on the table of what measures and what can be done to assist in the road to adapt to the realities on the ground, both at national as well as at local level. But I think the point that I was emphasizing, we may not need to wait even at the local level. If we deal with this issue at the household level, the population alone in Malawi is an issue. If we don't address that, much as we may be complaining elsewhere, we have local issues that we must deal with. Let's get along with our local issues so that our ecosystems are environmentally and as ecosystems, they are still able to make us survive, even in the context of this global big challenge of climate change.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And lastly, as we wrap up, I'd like Cecilia and Jenga to give us a way forward, particularly as we're working as one, as the United Nations, so that we can ponder on the issues, on the action as we leave this symposium. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, I think as I mentioned before, an integrated approach is inevitable. I think we cannot address hunger or food insecurity without taking into cognizance the importance of nurturing land, looking at those that rely on fisheries, on the life under seas, etc., and not continuing to pollute our environment. We've seen the huge amounts of plastics that are ending up in our oceans and seas, and therefore hugely impacting even not only on the life under the sea, but also on our food security. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about the climate finance. As I mentioned, it is more skewed towards mitigation actions. And a lot of African action that's required by African countries is on the adaptation side, as Benoit really said. But I think, we need to see how we galvanize ourselves around Africa to make a bigger case for this. There's a huge adaptation gap funding, and we require more money for funding this. We're seeing deals being closed on energy. It's important, and I say it's very important to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, but we need to accelerate action. But we can only accelerate action if there are adequate finances flowing for us to be able to have those motorcycles, to have extension workers reaching out to the farmers out there in the villages that are not well served by infrastructure. We need infrastructural health facilities that work in rural areas. And all this requires being incorporated in an adaptation response. We need seeds, we need technologies, etc. And therefore, we are calling for a huge, preference, particularly for Africa, that our donors continue to look at the adaptation financing gap. But I also want to talk a little bit about how we can embrace innovation. We just done a program where we've looked at the innovations that are happening, a lot of them led by young people. Young people out there are innovating, coming up with solutions on, solar drying, of our agricultural produce out there. How do we bring those innovations to scale? There are innovations around different methods of farming. We are seeing drones delivering in Ethiopia, medicine to isolated communities in rural areas. How do we bring these innovations to scale? And all these require financing, and all this require to be integrated in national development programs and to be given attention so that we can be able to respond to some of these challenges from within ourselves. We've been told as Africa we have an opportunity to leapfrog, but the enabling environment, not only the financing, but our own institutional setup, our own regulations and legal frameworks do not allow for this. So yes, let's unlock that. But at the end of the day, as the governors say, yes, we slow emissions, but let's accelerate action, each one of us, from the household level and up to the global level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'd like you to please give a round of applause to our eminent panelists. Dr. Benoit, thank you very much for being online. Mr. Kulekani, Mr. Kabambe, Mr. Jones, Cecilia, thank you so much for providing such an excellent introduction. And of course to Yola and Dr. Julita and the Honorable Minister who gave us an excellent intro for us to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our panelists. I have to say, I was so taken with the discussion, I almost forgot I was supposed to be emceeing. So thank you so much to all of you. And at this point, it's time to say farewell to our participants online. Thank you so much for being with us live here at the Africa Future Campus, University of Pretoria. You can continue to follow our discussion on Twitter and on Facebook. Please do. We'd love to hear from you. Tell us your thoughts, your views, and we'll get back to you. Thank you. So for everybody here here in the auditorium. We're going to go for